Honorable Prime Minister to deliver a speech not to exceed 7 minutes.
Young Earth creationism is true, not with the mathematical certainty of 2 + 2 = 4, nor is it true in the self-evidence of the statement a whole is greater than its parts. No. Youngism is true in the instrumental, penetrative, and methodologically scientific sense. A mode of judgment counseling us that when we appraise all timely and pertinent datum, the scale on the side of old Earth plate weighs lighter, rendering Youngism the most plausible theory at the moment. Quote, a theory's validity, end quote, said Pope St. John Paul II to the Pontifical Academy of Science in 1996, quote, depends on whether or not it can be verified. It is the constantly tested against the facts. Wherever it can no longer explain the latter, it shows its limitations and unsuitability. It must then be rethought, end quote. In this speech, I'll be offering 10 data points that leave old Earth theory unsuitably out of date. First, we'll look at the Colby Center researchers there, found that, quote, for example, rocks formed by the eruption of Mount St. Helens, data point 1, in 1980 were subsequently dated from hundreds of thousands to millions of years old by the potassium-argon dating method. Moreover, in the last 2 decades, more than 70 articles, data point 2, in peer-reviewed scientific journals have confirmed the presence of substantial amounts of carbon-14 in dinosaur bones, coal, and other organic material from every level of the geologic column. A geologic column that's supposed to go down, and go down by hundreds of millions of years the farther you go. Since carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, after 50 to 100,000 years, every atom of C14 would have decayed into nitrogen-14. So the presence of substantial amounts of C14 at every level of the geological column testifies to the fact that the entire fossil record was formed more or less at the same time thousands of years ago, during and in the immediate aftermath of Noah's flood, end quote. Next, so not only do we see dinosaur DNA is alive and well, maybe dinosaurs are dragons, we also see that marine life, we'll skip to polystrate fossils. According to the Apologetics Press, it says, quote, a polystrate fossil is a single fossil that spans more than one geological strata. Many polystrate tree trunk fossils have been discovered, as well as baleen whale, swamp plants called calamites, and catfish. Polystrate fossils prove that both the rock layers of the geological column and the surfaces between them do not require millions of years of slow and gradual accumulation and lithification, end quote. Next data point, the amount of salt in the sea. Again, the amount of salt in the sea, according to the Genesis website for Young Earth creationism, it says that, quote, ocean water is salty. Each year, hundreds of millions of tons of sodium are added to the sea, and only about 27% of it is removed by other processes, leaving an annual accumulation of 336 million tons of sodium. Starting with a zero sodium content in the sea and using the old Earth assumption of uniformitarianism, that's another word for old Earthism, the current concentration of sodium in the ocean would be reached in only 42 million years. According to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, however, the ocean is 3.8 billion years old. The response to this fact, as must be the case in other examples in this list, would obviously be that accumulation and or dissemination rates must have been different in the past. The average salt accumulation, however, would have to be over 90 times slower than present rate in order to accommodate the alleged age of the ocean. This conjecture simply does not hold under scrutiny, and even if it did, it would merely prove that creationist contention that uniformitarianism is not a reliable assumption, but rather catastrophism is, and that's why we should prefer the Youngism side, that there was a flood at one point that changed the level of salt in the ocean. Next, let's look at the amount of sediment on the sea floor. The article continues, quote, as water and wind scour the continents each year, 20 billion tons of materials is estimated to be deposited in the ocean. As the tectonic plates of the Earth move, subduction occurs, with one plate slowly diving under another towards the mantle. 1 billion tons of material is estimated to be removed from the seafloor each year from that process, leaving 19 billion tons of sediment accumulating each year on the ocean floor. On average, the sediment thickness of the ocean floor is 1,500 feet. Based on current rate of sediment deposition, however, i.e. assuming uniformitarianism once again, the sediment on the ocean floor would accumulate in only a small fraction of the alleged 3.8 billion years age of ocean. The average annual sediment accumulation would have to be 197 times smaller to match the ocean's age of 3.8 billion years. The amount of sediment on the seafloor simply does not support a billions of years old ocean, but fits well with a young Earth when the accelerated erosion rates during the immediately and after the flood are accounted for. Next, we can look at the DNA in ancient bacteria, which supports the young Earth. There's been DNA samples found in ancient bacteria, which doesn't make sense since it's supposed to be 250 million years old. The ESBOCO says, quote, simplest form of falsification is to compare a theory with the results of an experiment or an observation in nature. If the theory does not agree with the experiment or observation, it has been falsified. We have already shown on several levels how the experiments do not prove old Earth creationism, and therefore old Earth creationism, when we look at palisade fossils, when we look at sediment, when we look at marine life jungles, when we look at dinosaur DNA, when we look at the 70 studies of C14, when we look at Mount St. Helens data samples, when we look at big trunk theory, which I didn't get to, when we look at sea floor sediment, when we look at sea salt, all has falsified the theory of young Earthism. And so we're left with what Thomas Aquinas writes about creation, quote, the final perfection, which is the end of the whole universe, is the perfect beatitude of the saints at the consummation of the world. And the first perfection is the completeness of the universe at its first founding. And this is what is ascribed to the seventh day. Ultimately, I agree with the Catechism 358 that says, quote, God created everything for man, end quote. Then I say, why would he wait? Why would he wait 4.5 billion years to do so? Thank you for your time.
I thank the Honorable Prime Minister. 7 minutes.
But there weren't 24 hours.
First, may I, when it comes to many of these things that my opponent has mentioned, he's failed to mention like one of the largest and most important cores of like the belief that the universe is old. We've, with our various tools of science, measured how wide the entire universe is, and some like billions of light years across. But if the universe is only, what, let's say 6,000 years old, how has that light had time to reach us? Why can we see galaxies that are farther away than 6,000 years? We shouldn't even be able to see the edge of our own galaxy if the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Another big point is that, so the carbon-14 dating that my opponent mentioned. Carbon-14 dating as not the sole method of dating that that scientists use. Carbon-14 dating is not what they use in order to date ancient geological structures. They use the rocks around them with uranium, and lead dating is more usually used in order to determine like how old those really old rocks are. Because as my opponent said, carbon-14 decays fast. But also, you have to include soil contamination. Most of the fossils we find aren't the really deep ones. Most of the fossils we find are ones that have been brought closer to the surface for some reason or another, some geological factor. And like, one has to admit that in that process, some contamination can be brought about. Next, the salinity of water. So simply put, my opponent has forgotten the almost all those statements about continental shift. Continental shift is a very large and very elongated process that can change the environment over many, many years. And Earth's environment itself can change drastically. I mean, like 10,000 years ago, according to scientists, there's a massive ice age, right? And so, like, if there's this massive ice age 10,000 years ago, then my question would be, like, if where we're standing right now is like covered in glaciers 10,000 years ago, why can't like the salinity of the sea have been significantly less, or the salinity of the sea, like the rate at which it approaches, have been significantly less 10,000 years ago, or a million years ago, like let alone a million years ago. Another thing my opponent keeps mentioning is the flood, right? The flood does this, the flood does that. He says that the flood, like, often, like, he mentioned the flood in regards to salt water and flood in regards to sediment, right? But the flood isn't something we're refuting. Me and my opponent are not refuting anything about the flood. We're just saying that the flood could have totally happened. It did happen, because the church holds that. But that doesn't mean that the earth is young just because the flood happened. That has like no connection at all. And so another thing is that, so the sediment, also another point disrupted by continental shift, pun intended, is like the sediment like piling up in the sea over years excludes continental shift, volcanic activity. Like, you're just taking a number and you're just saying, well, if this happens this much over these few years, then logically the ocean should be higher, the sediment level should be much higher. But you're excluding like all the other factors. You're just looking at a single factor and saying, okay, if sediment keeps growing at this rate, it will continue to grow at this rate, regardless of anything else that happens. Another thing is that the salt and the sediment can be affected differently by different creatures over time, and as we know, according to reputable scientists, the different organisms affecting the environment over different times can actually affect the amount of sediment and salt in the water. A big important thing also my opponent has left out is that a vast majority of scientists who, like, not just like, oh, I'm a scientist, you know, like I kind of study at this university, I got like a master's in, I don't know, whatever. Like, vast majority of scientists who are like well educated, some who are Catholic, for instance, one of my teachers is a particle physicist, and she believes the Earth is old with good reason. And I would also, and lots of reputable scientists believe this, and like, I haven't been able to find many great and reputable scientists that have said, oh, the Earth must be young. Usually it's somebody who goes out to prove that the Earth is young and then discovers like things that look very nice for the Earth being young. But oftentimes when we have scientists who are just, originally how we discovered how old the Earth was, we just went and we studied and we discovered the Earth was older than we thought. And originally scientists, or some scientists, like Albert Einstein, for instance, were of the belief that the universe was eternal. One of our Catholic priests, Father George Lamantra, discovered that he discovered the idea of the Big Bang, and that basically set the universe as having a beginning. And according to the math of how the rate at which the universe is expanding right now, right, to go back onto his point of sediment deposit, if the universe is expanding at this rate right now, right, if that's the only variable we take into account, then by that logic, just like his sediment logic, if the sediment is increasing at this point right now, then the universe would have to be old. The universe would have to be billions of years old if we only take a single constant, just like his sediment. He only takes one constant, and I only take one constant, and that means his logic conflicts itself, which means that if you can take one constant and simply determine the truth of that thing that you're taking the constant of, that simply means that the universe has to be both ancient and sediment has to follow certain rules that are really kind of a loophole around the whole point. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of Opposition and now call upon the Prime Minister to interrogate the Leader of Opposition for a period not to exceed 3 minutes.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, Honorable Prime Minister. How does radioactive dating work? Radiometric, sorry.
Radiometric dating is, it works by basically discover the half-life of the element, which is how long it takes for half of it to be left. And then you see how much of that element is left after a certain amount of time. So you basically look at, say, some material, and if there's this much of it left, and there's this much composite left over from
So what's the reference point?
Sorry, what?
What's the reference point for radioactive dating?
The reference point, well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about anything within 5,000 years, it's generally carbon-14. If you're talking about things that are older, they usually use lead and uranium.
So how do you know the measure of decay if you don't know how much the uranium had to begin with?
Well, you can.
Were you there 4.54 billion years ago?
You don't let me answer your question. The point is that they look for the byproduct, the radioactive byproducts on the elements around it, because as they emit nuclei and various particles, they affect the element around them. So they look at that in reference to the normal elements of the rock.
All right. So is the standard radiometric dating procedure, does it account for all the different factors that could happen, or is it constant? Does it assume that the rate of decay is constant?
It usually assumes the rate of decay is constant to some extent, but also they just factors around it would ludicrously change it unless there was some radioactive, unless there was significant.
Tell me this: is uranium soluble? I'll answer. It is. So isn't solubility a very big factor in the decay of uranium?
Sorry, what's solubility here?
Solubility is when water
Dissolves.
then it.
I'm sure they take that into account.
Well, they don't take it from, they would take that into account from
Oh, really?
ocean area.
Well,
areas,
Koppitch,
but generally they take it from rocks in the ground around the target, not just.
Oh, so they assume a flood never happened and would have never touched this.
Well, just because a flood happened, I don't understand. Well, they assume a flood never happened? Well,
You said
the
they
flood never
dried
happened.
in the
Well,
ground.
the Bible didn't say the flood tore up the entire earth.
Uh-huh.
It just said the flood flooded the whole way. That doesn't mean that they didn't remove the entire sediment hundreds of feet down. It just may have removed a decent
It was
amount.
just the earth was a big bathtub sealed with silicon. And
It's still
nothing
with
else
silicon,
affected.
but you're saying that
Well, how about we
You have
move
to ask
on?
the question.
Yes. So you dealt a little bit with the idea of sediment.
15 seconds.
Maybe we'll grant you that. What are your responses to my other 8 falsified data points?
the other 8 falsified data points.
C4 sediments,
I-
polystrate fossils,
pretty good
marine
job.
life jungle.
Source.
All right.
You just asked me 10 questions or more.
The Leader of Opposition may now cross-examine the Prime Minister for a period not to exceed 3 minutes.
Now, what would you say about the idea that your sediment, you're not accounting for any other factors?
What would I say about what?
The fact that you're not accounting for any other factors in the calculation of your sediment. You're saying that sediment always constantly grows at this rate, and therefore it must not, nothing else can affect it, nothing else can change how much sediment there is. What would you say about that?
I have a source, Koppitch Research Center, serious scientists. They say that the radiometric dating that you cited, and you said scientists use, also uses the continent measure. So unless you're willing to give up radiometric dating, I cannot give up sedimentary dating. I'd also answer with Augustine in City of God that, quote, unbelievers are also deceived by false documents which ascribe to history many thousands of years. Although we can calculate from scripture, sacred scripture, that not 6,000 years have passed since the
That has
creation
nothing
of
to
man.
do with
End
my
quote.
question.
Real.
All right. So then I would have a question. What would you say to your source of Thomas Aquinas? What would you say about Thomas Aquinas' quote that Thomas
What?
Aquinas, referencing St. Augustine, says that let's see, he says, distinction, and where's the quote? Where did
Take
you
your
put the
time.
quote?
If you'd like, you can move on to a different question.
There's not a quote from Augustine.
Aquinas is on the first.
I can answer generally that Aquinas is regarded by
Well,
many
he referenced St. Augustine in saying that you do not literally need to take the 7 days as part of it's not a literal 7 days. St. Augustine said that you don't need to take it as literal. And St. Augustine went towards that. He did say you do need to take the creation of man as literal, but you do not need to take the creation of the age of the earth as well.
Sure, the Augustine could say that you don't need to. I would retort that out of 100 fathers of the church, excepting Origen, only one, Augustine, has a problem with one facet of the 4 facets of young earth creationism. So I think the fathers of the church have a pretty good record when it comes to youngism.
Yeah, well, I would also say, what about Saint? What would I say about Saint Cyprian? He taught that What about Saint Clement of Alexandria? Saint Clement of Alexandria taught that. Well, he was of the opinion that the earth. He was of the opinion the earth was eternal, that the world had always existed, right?
Yes.
And then there are other fathers who say that the earth is
15.
only young, and there are other fathers
15
who say
seconds.
that, such as St. Augustine, that the earth is old. So couldn't this be up for interpretation if the church fathers disagree on this?
So I think he would argue that it was created. The eternity, infinity, perpetuity,
Yes.
that's a different question than
Yes.
creation. We are debating creation.
Well, we aren't debating creation, we're debating the age at which it was created.
I think I would suggest rereading philosophy.
And I thank the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition, and now call upon the Member of Government to give a speech not to exceed 5 minutes.
Brethren, I come before you today, brethren, to put our orders of knowledge back into the way they're supposed to be. Before I do this, I will skip ahead to address some things that have been mentioned by the opposition. One of these, which they seem to make a very big deal out of at the beginning of their speech, was that calculating the date of the light from outer space, supposedly, has shown that this light must show that the universe is old because of the speed of light and how it's traveled and such. I will ask, what makes us think that the speed of light is the same in outer space as it is on Earth? And why are we using this as one of our main objections? It assumes that the speed of light is the same, that in the outer space there is no sort of element, no sort of ether or any other factor that would cause the speed to change. I would also ask, if we say, well, we see this light and it shows us that something must be this old, how old do you think, if you were scientifically observing the body of Adam upon creation, how old would you say Adam was? Would you say he was 33, or would you say he had just been created specially by God and was an old? I would also ask the same of the wine at Cana. If you were to test the wine at Cana, would you conclude, well, this must, because of the natural processes that we observe, this wine must have been aged for this many years. Meanwhile, by faith, we know that this wine was just created by the Lord. So too, I would like to stab at the presupposition of uniformitarianism, that we can measure things based off of how they decay now, or how things, speeds, calculations now. I don't propose this as a definitive interpretation of the verse, of course, but it's something to think about. It's 2 Peter 3, starting at verse 3. Knowing this first, that in the last days there shall come deceitful scoffers, walking after their own lusts, which I'm not attributing to my opponents, saying, where is his promise or coming? For since the time that the fathers slept, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they are willfully ignorant of, that the heavens were before, and the earth out of water and through water, consisting by the word of God, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. As we can see, as one can extrapolate, the world that was pre-flood is not the same world. It has perished according to the word of the apostle. Now, one cannot this does not demonstratively prove that uniformitarianism is real, but it certainly militates against it. I will also say that our faith, what was mentioned was, all these scientists, all the ones that we think are good, don't say this. I will say that the interpretation of Scripture is not based on the consensus of the scientists, but on the fathers and the theologians. Now, by saying this, I don't claim to elevate our position to the status of dogma, but I do say that obviously, if we are weighing consensi between, this many scientists in the 21st century say this, as opposed to this many fathers and doctors and learned men of the church thought otherwise, I would say
1 minute remaining.
One holds much more weight than another. I guess upon this I will withhold my quote mines. I guess I will come to the defense of the great Father Augustine, it was claimed he believed in an old earth. And I will say a quote that my colleague said in a different translation. They are deceived too by those highly mendacious documents which profess to give that history of many thousand years, though reckoning by the sacred writings. So this is an interpretation of the scriptures. So this is a theological point of the great church Father Augustine. We find that not 6,000 years have passed. It's also to note that St. Augustine is almost more of a young earth creationist in his view of the 6 days of Genesis, because he believes that the creation was instantaneous, not that it was developed over millions and billions of years. So I will say in his defense, there's also another lengthy quote from the City of God. And I would just say the weight of the theological and reasonable evidence
It must
is
be
on the
concluded.
side of creation. Therefore, I
So.
cease to exist.
Thank you very much. I thank the member of government. I call upon the member of opposition to give a speech not to exceed 5 minutes.
Further allow me to bring up the Okay. If there are no one opposed, I shall begin now. I would completely concur with the affirmative point that in measuring our beliefs, it is not the consensus of scientists that should be weighed most heavily, but the evidence of church fathers. Thus, I ask that we take a closer look at what these fathers have said. Now, to expound upon the point that my brother has said, it's foremost in the East, Saint Clement of Alexandria fully believed that the earth was, or the universe rather, was infinite. I will have a quote here right now. And he says, that then we may be taught that the world was originated and not suppose that God made it in time. Prophecy adds, this is the book of generation, also the things in them, when they were created in the day that God made heaven and earth. For the expression when they were created intimates an indefinite and dateless production. Now, that was the position of the many Greek philosophers before them, whom Augustine and I think Theophilus of Antioch retort very aggressively in their points. Now, to mention the great Father Augustine, whom St. Thomas Aquinas refers to most often in his Summa. St. Augustine did not, as both sides have conceded, did not believe in the literality of the 7 days, rather in an instantaneous creation of things. But an important point is to be made, for when he speaks that 6,000 years have not passed, he is referring to the creation of man. And he makes very clear, I'll just say the quote, for these pagans are deceived, though, we've already said this, blah, blah, blah. So, though reckoning by the sacred documents, we find that not 6,000 years have yet passed, and then later he says, since the creation of man, which is important. It is a small point, but it's an important point nonetheless. And Augustine also speaks of the theory of distinction and adornment, in which he speaks that in the first day, not to be taken as 24-hour periods, but rather days. Days being the notion of angelic knowledge. So as soon as these things came into creation, they were known in sequential order by the angels before God. And it is not to be taken as 24-hour periods. But on the first day, first day the earth was created, and on the fourth day it was adorned. It was distinctive at the first and adorned at the fourth. And then this trend continues throughout the second and the fifth and the third and the sixth. And this is incredibly expounded upon in St. Thomas's Summa. St. Thomas does not say in his on the days of creation as a whole, on the 7 days as a whole, question of his Summa. He does not say that the earth has existed for X amount of years, but he presents the different opinions of the fathers of the time. He mostly quotes Augustine in terming that it is not to be taken as fully literally, but it was rather distincted on one day and adorned on the next, or on the 3 days later. And he's the father whom Augustine is the father whom Thomas quotes most certainly, but he does not give an exact answer of how many years. He rather promotes the different views, but prefers Augustine's. Now, on the fathers, I know I have little time.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you, sir. But on the fathers, I think it is important to note that Saint Cyprian of Carthage put forth the idea that each day of creation lasted 1,000 years. So thus, the 7 days, because quoting Psalm 90 verse 4, in which says, 1 day is like 1,000 years unto the Lord. But so the days would be within a period of 7,000 years. But later in that same treatise, which his notion is in the treatise 11 to the exhorting martyrdom, he says it very passively, meaning that it was probably very commonly held at the time. He says that 6,000 years have passed since the creation of man, and that would be 7,000 plus around 5,000, so that would be around 12,000, differing, that shows the distinction and difference between fathers of the church on this point.
I thank the member of opposition. The House will now be opened first to questions and then to comments. Questions and their answers should be brief.
I'd like to ask the guy here,
Speak up.
student government guy, if he, where he gets this basis for the claim that light needs a medium, or light is affected by the medium that it travels to, because it has been thoroughly proven by scientists that it does not. And if I shine my phone flashlight through my finger, it goes the same speed as this.
Have you done that in outer space?
Outer space is just an empty void.
Have you explored all of outer space to know this?
No.
So you don't have
But light
empirical evidence?
light doesn't depend on the medium. If you shine a light through water, it travels the exact same speed.
Do you know that it would travel through water at the exact same speed on another planet?
Yes.
How?
Because it's not affected by gravity or by the mediums or by any of that. Light just goes.
On Earth, yes. But how do you know that this is the case elsewhere?
The sun,
Yeah, ether's big, bro.
Okay, I just mentioned the ether to be like esoteric. Like you don't have to believe in ether, okay?
Alright. Can I ask the gentleman from Silicon Valley a question?
You may indeed.
So you mentioned that the 99 church fathers believed in your perspective. Could you name them?
The consensus of the fathers. I have direct quotes from Irenaeus, Basil, Thomas, Theophilus of Antioch, Father Lactantius, Augustine again, and then I was quoting that on the authority of the Koppitch Institute for Creation Research and the Genesis Creation Institute, which do have a replete list if you'd like to find them on their websites.
Also another question. So, is it possible that the meaning of the word day, as in the meaning of the Hebrew word used in the original writing of the Old Testament, was mistranslated or potentially quickly translated and not fully expounded on all its possible meanings? Because unlike English, words in other languages have various meanings.
I mean, I suppose that would be kind of bad if the church for thousands of years had misinterpreted the first Genesis. Well, I shouldn't say the church, even the theologians of the church. I do believe in the Pontifical Institute, or the Pontifical Biblical Commission's 1909 statement. I believe this was magisterial at the time, although the commission is not magisterial anymore, in which they also affirm that Genesis 1 to 3 must be taken as history and not merely allegory. They do say that, I do believe they say it's permissible, at least permissible to talk about the interpretation of the word yom, which is day. But I would simply say I think it's more probable that it's 24 hours.
I believe that
even if people are free to assume.
I believe that day in the Old Testament is just put there because it represents the Sabbath day, the 6 days, and then the other day, the 7 days of the week. And so they put day there to keep the symbolism alive, while not intending it to be taken literally.
I know the question was answered by my partner. May I also answer his question with a quote from Thomas Aquinas? The first one, in the Summa Theologia, he says, quote, "Thus we find it said at the first, that, quote, he called the light day, end quote, for the reason that later on a period of 24 hours is also called day, where it is said that there was evening and morning one day." End quote.
Is that the same word?
Are you questioning Thomas
That's the same
Aquinas?
Hebrew word.
Yom means day, that's just what Yom Kippur.
Are you a doctor of the church?
Well, Yom is also used in Genesis 2 to mean wind.
Are you
You
saying that
think
just
the text says on the sixth when?
No, I'm saying that.
he's Jewish, so you know.
Yeah, I'm spiritually Semitic.
But it means different things.
Can I ask the gentleman from Silicon Valley? Do you not think that the usage of years and days later in the New Testament, referring to people being, for instance, 700 years old, do you not think that goes towards the opinion that perhaps day and year do not have the same qualitative meaning, or quantitative, meaning that they do in per se the modern era?
1,000-year reign and
Yeah, I do believe that pre-flood humans could have lived longer. There have been skulls of giants that found in southern central United States that corroborate this claim. And so I do think it is possible for humans to live 100, 200, 300 years.
Thank you.
I'll let him go first.
Wait, I can? Okay. To the previous point, I think it is necessary that we speak with the authority of the fathers in terms of interpreting days and hours. Days being 24-hour periods. I'd like to quote City of God as the same as we have been saying multiple times, but I think it is necessary to speak on Augustine's meaning of day. So, quote, "We see that our ordinary days have no evening but by the setting of the sun, and no morning but by the rising of the sun. But the first 3 days were all passed without sun, but it is reported to have been made on the 4th day. And first of all, indeed, light was made by the word of God, and God, we read, separated from darkness and called the light day and the darkness night. But what kind of light that was, and by what periodic movement it made evening and morning, is beyond the reach of our senses. Neither can we understand how it was, and yet must unhesitatingly believe it. Thus, it is not it is not said by Augustine to mean 24-hour periods. Rather, just because God, if I'm reading it correctly, and mea culpa if I am not, we have to agree, we have to assent with reason and faith to say that it would be a day to God, but we cannot understand it because the sun had not been created for the first 3 days.
What question is this answering?
It's not really a question.
Also the
It's more. I just wanted to put the quote.
Yeah.
also the going off of what
Speaker.
going off of what you
Point of order. He's presented a comment in the question period. Could we please move to a real question?
It was a response to what he said to me.
This honorable gentleman?
I was adding to it.
What is the creationist account for the Native American migration?
So I would not venture to, since we are on stolen land, to presume to exegete the texts of the people who were here first. So I wouldn't do it, but I'm sure it's big and beautiful, and that it's rich with culture, and it might be written down on a banana peel somewhere. But our position is not the technicalities of the Genesis 1 to 11 account. Our position is that when we look at generally the church fathers, when we look at generally scripture, it inclines the preponderance of evidence towards a younger earth than an older earth. Does that mean it was made in 10,000 years or 20,000 years? We don't know. But the general consensus in uniformitarianism is 4.54 billion, and that's what we're arguing against. And that's what most scientists, like my opponent said, believe.
Well,
Okay, do you have a question? If not, then we'll go to the comments afterwards.
well, then we'll just go to comment.
Okay, anybody else have a further question? Okay, we have the period of inquisition now being terminated. The House opens the floor to comments of up to 2 minutes in length.
All right, I was gonna say that. Okay, so years in the Bible throughout it don't always mean the same thing. For instance, in Revelation, it says that Jesus will. It says that sin will be gone, right? There's something about like the beast going to sleep and then coming back after 1,000 years, and obviously to believe that Jesus will have 1,000 years on reign of the earth is a heresy. I've heard it said that it's a heresy, and I believe it. I forget the name of it. It's like millenarianism. Yeah, millenarianism. And also, the fact that days for God are not the same days as us, because to God all of time is like a passing moment. All of time is a day. God is outside of time. He does not depend on days. There's seven days of the week are just to kind of reflect 7, the perfect number. But
Point of order. Where are the pizzas?
They will be arriving at 8:11 to 8:16.
but God is outside of time. He doesn't work across days. Well, I don't think, at least that's
Cool. I thank you. Anybody else have any further comments?
Doesn't his creation, doesn't it? Yeah, he's outside time, but his creation is within time.
Real.
One of the church fathers, several of the church fathers, including Augustine, believe.
The day of the Sabbath made for man.
Okay,
and not
you've
made
only
for
cited like 2.
The day of
I've
the
got
Sabbath
it.
was made for
Augustine
man,
and
but that's
Cyprian.
And Sabbath is
out
time.
no.
Like,
Well, as the church run by
week,
majority.
the week is to
The
reflect
consensus
a
of the
bigger
fathers is run by
period.
majority.
Well, this is the consensus of the fathers on a scientific matter, which isn't.
Well, that would be a matter of
faith.
debate, because St. Augustine cited the authority of Scripture when he said the earth was not 6,000 years. So that's kind of what the This is the time for the peoples to talk.
And if, like, your point was that St. Augustine said that the 6,000 years preceded the first creation of man, but as the gentleman from Chicago noted, or someone noted, I don't remember, but he believed that creation was instantaneous, right? Or the 7 days was instantaneous. So wouldn't that mean that there's an instantaneous period and then 6,000 years preceding that period? So therefore, the Earth is 6,000 years old, according to St. Augustine.
Augustine said that there's 6,000 years since the beginning of man.
Yeah, and before man, there's like an instantaneous creation of the world, according to him.
It still points towards the 7 days being symbolic. So if one can interpret it as instantaneous, one can also.
Well, if it's instantaneous, there's no time.
If creation is instantaneous, then why would
But it
creation
Well, the
end?
whole-
Creation ends with the creation.
Augustine
Creation
doesn't
ends
say it's
instantaneously.
instantaneous.
Yeah, so that's
You can
6,000
leave
years.
it up to the
Instantaneous.
Yes.
0 plus 6,000 is 6,000.
No.
I think he does support instantaneous creation.
Yeah.
Now,
The point.
You can talk about all the other proofs.
both sides can mention Augustine, and we can probably misinterpret him.
What about origin?
He's not actually.
What we would say is
I'm not talking about origin. No, I'm just, as a general statement, you can have at least 4 different schools of thought in terms of this within the fathers. You can have Augustinian, allegorical, which is also Thomistic. I don't know if you would say Cyprianian, which is just 7,000 years of creation. Clement, which would be infinite, or infinite.
So 3 for 6.
And then the fourth would be yours, yes. Now, simply put, it would be permissible and tenable for the modern day believers to believe different things if the fathers believe different things about creation.
I don't think, putting aside the creation day, I don't think that's how the consensus of the fathers worked. If one consensus being a general consensus, if I don't know where the 100 number comes from, but let's just say theoretically 3 out of 100 disagreed, that would not mean
I don't feel
that everyone would just be free to,
It's-
like you.
Well, can
you
you come up
guys
with
said,
another
I
example?
don't-
You
I
guys-
don't-
Wait, order, please.
I'd also like to say that.
Finish your point, please.
As you said, you can't find, you were basically citing the consensus of the, scientists. Well, what if we say, well, we know a couple scientists that disagree with that, so therefore that scientism, we are scientifically permitted to hold our view. Wouldn't the consensus be analogous to that of the fathers?
Well, I'd say that
In terms of permissibility of holding different views.
Yes, I mean, I don't think would you say that scientifically, if you just abstracted, if you were like theoretically a materialist, that it would be permissible to hold to an older or a younger? Because we can find a few scientists that disagree with the consensus.
your point is
That's
interesting,
logical.
and I'd like to say that the
Consistent.
just mention this, that the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible that I have,
Which is not the source of our faith.
which is approved by the church and was written by Scott Hahn, who has studied the Bible for
Point of order,
for decades.
He did not write the whole thing.
Yeah,
I don't
but-
know what you mean by approved by the church.
No, but the notes that Scott Hahn put in it himself.
They're not all his notes.
The footnotes.
For example, there's a note in Sirach which is like insane and was put in by the founder of Catholics for Israel. So this is not all of, it's not a complete Scott Hahn.
Well, the first Genesis footnote that he put in there says that Genesis does not say that you have to believe that the world was created in 6 days or that it wasn't. Like, it's up to interpretation. And so your point could be valid and our point could be valid.
Well,
and
I mean-
one of them is of course objectively true, or none of them could be true. There could be
Yes, I think
another point that
we've
could be
been
true.
clear, try not to use language of imposition, but just say that we think this is more
Yeah.
probable based on the data.
Well, I think that going from that is
Well, you've
actually
also-
somewhat valid.
Well, you've also tried to bring up points that are like, oh, well, it's not a valid interpretation because the church fathers said X. So that means our interpretation is
Yes,
invalid.
yes.
Are we having
And you
a,
have
are
been
we
trying to
having,
say that
a-
science-
are we having a data, are we having a data-oriented debate, or are we having a theological debate? Because my
Point-
understanding
point
of
of
time
order.
coming into this is we were.
Yeah, point of order. Since the discussion now rotates around the main speakers, could we move to final comments?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any seconds?
Um,
That's
Yeah, this also, Pope Francis said, when we read in Genesis the account of creation, we risk imagining God as a magician with a magic wand able to make everything, but that's not so. He created beings and allowed them to develop according to the internal laws that he gave to each one, so that they were able to develop and to arrive at their fullness of being. So why should we listen to Augustine when we can listen to the Pope?
We respect the late Holy Father's opinion, personal opinion, mere opinion, inferior opinion.
Okay, any further comments from the House? Okay then. The period of comments now being terminated, I call upon the Leader of Opposition to deliver the first rebuttal speech not to exceed 5 minutes, reminding him that while new examples are welcome, new arguments are not. What's that?
He's going.
Okay.
Oh, yeah? Five minutes or so?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, and if with no further ado, I can begin now. Okay. Throughout this entire debate, it is it is a notion of importance to say that more than fact, it is ability to believe that is of primary importance for it is permissibility and ability to believe that is of primary importance for the Venerable Pope Pius XII in his encyclical Humanae notions that, quote, for these reasons, the teaching of the authority of the Church does not forbid that, in conformity with the present state of human sciences and sacred theology, research and discussions on the part of men experienced in both fields take place with regard to the doctrine of evolution. And it's regarding others as well. And it isn't as far as it requires into the origin of human bodies coming from pre-existent and living matter, for the Catholic faith obliges us to hold that human souls are immediately created by God. So, in a matter of permissibility, we have doctrinal ability. Well, we have a doctrinal statements, including from Pope St. Paul VI and Dei Verbum, as state that a diversity of opinions is available. Now,
Young.
To
Order.
what else was I missing? That one, I'm sorry. So, and also in the same realm, in terms of diversity of opinions, as was stated in the claims session, since there are patristic interpretive differences in terms of the creation of the earth, there are, while still referencing the consensus of the fathers, there are still differences that have been noted, particularly in St. Thomas's Summa Theologiae, in which he says that in which he does not give full credit to one or the other. He does not reference the consensus of the fathers in terms of the interpretation of Genesis. He rather promotes the different views and puts them with the Augustinian view at an elevated extent, that each can be held and also coexist, work together, that is. So thus, if the fathers and the holy doctors hold differing views on the subject, it would be permissible for us to do the same, particularly considering that some take it from way Eastern, far older Eastern, Western philosophers. I'm so dumb. Particularly in terms of Clement, as previously stated to the deaf, holding the view of philosophers as opposed to strict Genesian theology.
1 minute remaining.
Might as well conceal my time. I'm speaking nonsense.
As you are. Okay, so I will move member of opposition. I call upon the Prime Minister to deliver the final speech of the round, not to exceed 5 minutes, reminding him that while new examples are welcome, new arguments are not.
Young Earth creationism is true, not the mathematical certainty of 2 + 2 = 4, nor is it true the self-evidence of the statement a whole is greater than its parts. No. Youngism is true in an instrumental, penetrative, methodological, scientific sense. A mode of judgment, counseling us that when we appraise all timely and pertinent datum, the scale of the side of the old Earth plate weighs lighter, rendering Youngism the most plausible theory at the moment. Comrades, I've talked about St. Helen, data point 1. I've talked about 70 different studies over the course of, I believe, 2 decades, data point, well, that's 71. I talked about dinosaur DNAs, about their DNA is found all over the place, and it shouldn't be alive. It was supposed to be killed a long time ago, but it's still here. Big Bang, maybe it didn't happen. Maybe dinosaurs are dragons, question mark. We also find the sediment cycle. My opponent has some sort of a tentative response to the point that sediment should be 197 times more by now if the Earth is 4.54 billion years. I think he said that, there are extraneous circumstances. The whole point of uniformitarianism is that there are no extenuating circumstances. That everyone kind of is a hodgepodge blob, and over the course of hundreds of millions of years, you kind of all blob into intelligence. We all blob into forming a society. That uniformitarianism is constant progress upwards. This does not allow, his argument does not stand with his position. He never responded to the polystrate fossils that go through the fossil record, and they go through different levels of rocks that are supposed to be hundreds of millions of years in difference. How can you have a tree half in 100 million years ago and half in 200 million years ago? That's a bootstrap fallacy. It doesn't work. My opponent's never addressed it. The preponderance of evidence is on the Youngism side. When we're looking at data, facts, it's on the Youngism side. They would even say that maybe we should look at science when interpreting the scriptures. Maybe the fathers of the church got it wrong. People back in the day, before Descartes came around, they were just high on garlic. They were just, drinking cocaine wine, maybe. I don't know. Well, if we look at the science, we see that the sea floor sediment should be way higher. Sea salt should be way more, but it's not. The only scientific point my opponent ever mentioned was radiometric dating. I talked about carbon-14 dating, which all points to, when we look at the dinosaurs, when we look at geology, when we look at coal samples, all points to the Earth being around 10,000 years, because carbon has a half-life of 5,730 years. So if you're finding carbon in things that are deep down in the ground, in dinosaurs that are supposed to be way extinct, then maybe that's how you know they're actually not that old after. So we have carbon-14 dating. They have nothing except for what they call radiometric dating. But that has some problems. To assign an age to a rock of 1.4 billion years, one must first assume that the initial conditions of the rock are known. In other words, how much uranium and lead were in the material to begin with. We can't know that. This is completely unreasonable. The standard radiometric dating procedure also assumes the rate of radioactive decay has been constant for the entire history of the rock. But this assumption is also completely unreasonable. As we know, the decay rate can be affected by factors like temperature, pressure in the laboratory. Moreover, if uranium to light decay has been going on for billions of years, as evolutionary mythology requires, there would be more than 100 times more helium in Earth and atmosphere than actually is present right now. My opponent's metric is gone. The only metric that remains is the government side. Therefore, the preponderance of evidence at the moment rests with the government, and if we're to accept what Pope John Paul II said in 1996, we have to toss away the wrong theory that's been proven falsified and accept the new one. Then he talked about Cyprian, how he believes in infinity. He can believe in infinity philosophically, but he having proof that he believes it in the sense of biblical exegesis, also because the Fourth Lateran Council infallibly declared God created everything in its whole substance from nothing ex nihilo in the beginning. Therefore, Cyprian couldn't have got that wrong, because I don't think he'd be a father of the church in that instance. Really, yeah, there's not much more to say, except for that Augustine was not for an old earth. I'd like to close with a quote from him. Quote, "He spoke and they were made. He commanded and they were created. Creation, therefore, did not take place slowly in order that a slow development might be implanted in those things that are slow by nature, nor were the ages established at a plodding pace at which they now pass. Time brings about the development of these creatures according to the laws of their numbers. But there was no passage of time when they received these laws at creation." End quote. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
I thank the Honorable Prime Minister. This House stands resolved. Each man in favor, raise his hand saying yay.
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 This is for the creation, for the young Earth.
Yay.
Okay, 7. Each man against, raise his hand saying nay.
Nay.
Each coward abstaining, raise his hand if you dare.
I don't know.
With 7 votes, 2 votes for opposition, and 2 abstentions for whatever reason, the motion has carried.